It was supposed to be a fun weekend, one last hurrah before college scattered the group across the country. 5 friends, a dusty old camper van, and Whispering Pines campground. The name alone made Eric scoff as he drove. Whispering Pines sounds like a retirement home, he said, glancing at his girlfriend Megan. She smirked, brushing her blonde hair behind her ear. Better than some sketchy motel, she replied. In the back, Jenny, Tim, and Paul were laughing over a playlist of 90s hits. The sun dipped below the horizon as the van rumbled down the empty, tree-lined road. The campsite was nestled deep in the woods, the kind of place that felt forgotten by time. As they set up their tents, the air felt still. No crickets, no birds, just the wind brushing the tops of the towering pines. "Hey, where's the whispering?" Jenny joked, unpacking her sleeping bag. "Maybe it's shy," Tim replied, rolling his eyes. By the time they built a fire, the unease had faded. Marshmallows roasted, stories were told, and beer cans cracked open. But as the night deepened, the woods seemed to press closer. Shadows stretched longer, and the laughter died down. "Did you hear that?" Megan whispered. The group froze. A faint noise drifted through the trees, a soft melodic hum. It was distant, almost like someone singing a lullaby. "Probably the wind," Paul said, his voice more confident than his eyes. But Megan wasn't so sure. The sound grew louder, circling the campsite. It wasn't the wind. It was a voice. By midnight, the group had retreated to their tents. Eric and Megan shared one, their whispers muffled by nylon walls. "It's creepy out here," she said. "It's just your imagination," Eric replied, though his tone betrayed him. Then, a scream shattered the silence. It was Jenny. They burst from their tent, flashlights piercing the darkness. Jenny was standing near the trees, her face pale as moonlight. "Someone was watching me," she stammered. "Right there." She pointed to a gap in the trees. Tim and Paul rushed toward the spot, but there was nothing. No footprints, no rustling, just the oppressive quiet of the woods. "Let's all stay close to the fire," Megan suggested, her voice trembling. They sat together, backs to the flames, watching the woods with wide eyes. The hum returned, louder now, more like a chant. It felt as though the forest itself was alive, breathing, whispering. "I don't like this," Paul muttered. Then the chanting stopped, replaced by a soft, crackling sound. They turned to see their fire dimming, the flames shrinking until they vanished entirely. Darkness swallowed them. Eric fumbled for his flashlight, but it flickered and died. The others' lights followed suit. A metallic scent filled the air, iron, sharp and thick. Megan gagged. "Blood," she whispered. The hum returned, deafening now, like dozens of voices speaking in unison. Shadows moved between the trees, figures too tall and too thin to be human. "Run!" Eric shouted. They bolted into the woods, branches clawing at their skin. Eric kept Megan's hand tight in his, their breaths ragged as they stumbled through the darkness. The voices followed, closing in. "Over there!" Tim yelled, pointing to an old ranger station up ahead. Its windows were shattered, but it was shelter. They piled inside, slamming the door shut. The chanting stopped. Silence again. "Did we lose them?" Jenny asked, her voice barely audible. Paul peered through the broken window. "I don't..." A hand grabbed him, yanking him out with inhuman speed. His scream echoed, then cut off. Panic erupted. Eric barricaded the door while Megan and Jenny sobbed. Tim searched for anything they could use as a weapon. "They're toying with us," Tim muttered. "Whatever they are." A loud bang shook the door, then another. "It's gonna break!" Jenny cried. The wood splintered. Through the cracks, they saw glowing eyes, dozens of them, hovering in the dark. "We need to fight!" Eric yelled. Tim swung a broken chair leg as the door burst open, but the creatures were too fast. Their long, skeletal limbs reached for them. Megan and Eric ran deeper into the station, down a narrow stairwell that led to a basement. The air grew colder, the metallic smell stronger. In the corner of the room was a crude altar made of animal bones and rusted tools. Symbols were scrawled on the walls in what could only be blood. "This isn't random," Megan whispered. The hum returned, louder than ever. One by one, the symbols on the walls began to glow. The basement door slammed shut, trapping them inside. The last thing Megan saw was Eric being dragged into the dark by something she couldn't fully see. Long fingers, sharp teeth, and eyes that burned like fire. The whispering filled her head, a single word repeated over and over. "Stay." Megan's scream joined the chorus of voices as the forest claimed her. By morning, the campground was empty. The ranger station was gone. All that remained was a circle of scorched earth where the altar once stood, and the faint sound of whispers in the wind. We called it Camp Deadwood, though its real name was Lakeview Retreat. There wasn't a lake in sight, and the only view was the overgrown woods that had swallowed the place whole. It was just the kind of spot we were looking for, a secluded, rundown campground with no cell service, and enough creepy vibes to make us feel like we were starring in our own horror movie. It was me, Jake, and my 3 friends. Emma, the sensible one, Troy, the loudmouth, and Heather, who loved ghost stories a little too much. We were all packed into Troy's dad's rusty old Jeep, driving down a dirt road that hadn't seen a car in years. The sun was setting, painting the sky a deep, ominous orange. "This place is going to be epic," Troy said, punching Jake on the arm. "We'll have the fire going, roast some marshmallows, and maybe summon a ghost or two." Emma groaned. "Do you ever stop talking, Troy?" He grinned. "No." We arrived just as darkness settled over the woods. The campground was exactly what we'd hoped for. Abandoned cabins with peeling paint, a rickety dock that stretched over a swampy pond, and a fire pit surrounded by rotting logs. It smelled like mildew and wet leaves. Heather was the first to speak. "This place is perfect." Perfectly creepy, I thought, but I didn't say it out loud. None of us wanted to be the first to admit we were a little freaked out. We set up camp near the fire pit. As Troy struggled to get the fire going, Heather wandered off toward the cabins. "Don't go too far," Emma called after her. Heather waved her off. "I'm just exploring." By the time she came back, the fire was roaring, and we were settling in with hot dogs and beers Troy had smuggled in his backpack. "So," Heather said, plopping down on a log, "I found something weird." "Define weird," I said. She held up an old, rusted horseshoe. "This was nailed to one of the cabin doors." "So what?" Troy asked, taking a swig of beer. "It's probably just some old good luck charm." Heather shook her head. "It wasn't for luck. It was upside down." Emma frowned. "Upside-down horseshoes are bad luck. It's like keeping the bad spirits in." Troy laughed, but it was forced. "Come on. You're not seriously scared of some old superstition." Heather shrugged, tossing the horseshoe into the bushes. "Just thought it was interesting." As the night wore on, we told scary stories, most of them the same ones we'd heard 100 times before. But when it was Heather's turn, she didn't tell a story. She leaned in close to the fire, her face lit by the flickering flames, and said, "Do you guys hear that?" We went quiet, straining to listen. At first, there was nothing but the crackle of the fire and the rustling of leaves in the breeze. Then I heard it, a faint, rhythmic tapping, like someone knocking on wood. Troy rolled his eyes. It's probably just a raccoon or something. But the tapping didn't stop. It moved, circling us. Tap, tap, tap. Then silence. Then tap, tap, tap again, closer this time. Emma shivered. "Maybe we should head back to the car." "Are you kidding?" Troy said. "We haven't even started the real fun yet." But the fun was over. The tapping stopped, replaced by a low, guttural growl that seemed to come from everywhere at once. We scrambled to our feet, grabbing flashlights and phones. I pointed my light toward the trees, but all I saw were shadows. The growling grew louder, and suddenly there was a loud crash behind us. We spun around to see the fire pit overturned, embers scattered across the ground. "Run!" Heather screamed. We didn't argue. We ran blindly into the woods, our flashlights bobbing and flickering as we tripped over roots and rocks. I could hear Emma crying behind me, Troy cursing, Heather's ragged breathing, and underneath it all, that growling, impossibly close. We stumbled into one of the cabins and slammed the door shut. The room was dark and reeked of mold. I pressed my back against the door, trying to catch my breath. "What the hell was that?" Troy gasped. Heather shook her head. "I don't know, but it's not human." The growling stopped, replaced by silence so deep it made my ears ring. Then a new sound, scratching, like nails dragging across the wooden walls. The scratches moved, circling the cabin faster and faster. Something heavy slammed against the door, and I felt it shudder against my back. "We're gonna die here," Emma whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Shut up," Troy snapped. "Nobody's dying." But his bravado was gone. We were trapped, and we all knew it. The scratching stopped. For a moment, there was nothing but our shallow breathing. Then the door creaked open, slow and deliberate. I staggered back, my flashlight flickering as I pointed it at the doorway. There was nothing there, just the dark. Troy edged forward, peering outside. "I think it's gone." "Don't," Heather warned. "It's not gone, it's waiting." But Troy stepped outside, his flashlight sweeping over the trees. He turned back to us, grinning. "See? I told you." Something yanked him into the dark. His scream was short, cut off with a sickening crunch. We didn't wait. We ran again, deeper into the woods until we reached the swampy pond. The dock loomed ahead, its planks rotted and uneven. We didn't have a choice. We ran onto it, the wood creaking under our weight. Heather stopped suddenly, pointing at the water. "Look!" Shapes moved beneath the surface, twisted, shadowy figures with glowing eyes. They rose, slowly, water cascading off their skeletal forms. "What do we do?" Emma sobbed. Heather looked at me, her eyes wide with terror. "We don't." The dock splintered beneath us, and we plunged into the water. It was freezing, thick with weeds that wrapped around our limbs like fingers. I clawed my way to the surface, gasping for air, but the shapes were everywhere, closing in. The last thing I saw was Heather's face, pale and frozen in horror, before something dragged me under. They found the Jeep the next morning parked on the dirt road. The camp was abandoned, the fire pit cold. Of the four of us, there was no sign, just an old rusted horseshoe lying in the ashes. And if you stand at the edge of that swamp on a quiet night, you might hear it. Tap, tap, tap. The sound of Camp Deadwood calling you home. They say there's a reason Hollow Pines closed down. Something about a freak accident, but no one really knows the whole story. That's the thing about old campgrounds. There are always stories, and they all end the same way. Don't go there. We went anyway. It was supposed to be one last summer adventure before college split us apart. Me, Sam, and my two best friends, Danny, the Joker, and Jess, the level-headed one. Danny borrowed his cousin's beat-up minivan, loaded with camping gear and snacks, and we hit the road just as the sun was dipping below the horizon. The drive was half the fun. Windows down, music blasting, the kind of freedom that makes you feel invincible. By the time we turned off onto the dirt road leading to Hollow Pines, the air had turned cool, and the trees on either side seemed to close in around us. "This place looks like the start of every horror movie ever," Danny said, grinning as he steered the van over a pothole. Jess rolled her eyes. "Keep driving, it's just a forest." But even she sounded unsure. When we got there, the camp looked wrong. The cabins were skeletal remains, their roofs sagging and their windows gaping like empty eye sockets. The fire pit in the center of the clearing was overgrown with weeds, and the wooden sign that once read Hollow Pines Campground was so faded it was barely legible. "It's perfect," Danny declared, hauling his backpack out of the van. Jess shook her head. "This place is falling apart. Are we sure it's safe to stay here?" "We'll be fine," I said, more to convince myself than her. "It's just one night." We set up our tents near the fire pit, using the last light of the day to gather wood. By the time the fire was crackling, darkness had settled in. The forest around us was alive with the chirping of crickets and the occasional rustle of leaves. Danny leaned back against a log, grinning. "So, who wants to tell the first ghost story?" Jess groaned. "We're already in the middle of one, isn't that enough?" Danny ignored her. "Fine, I'll start. Did you know this place is haunted?" "Danny," I warned, but he was already on a roll. "Legend has it, a kid drowned in the lake back in the 80s. Some say his ghost still wanders the camp, looking for anyone who will play with him. They call him the Hollow Boy because..." A loud snap cut him off. We all froze, staring into the trees. "What was that?" Jess whispered. Danny laughed nervously. "Probably just a deer or something." But it didn't sound like a deer. The fire cast long, flickering shadows across the clearing as we sat in uneasy silence. I kept telling myself it was just the wind or an animal, but my gut said otherwise. "I'm gonna check it out," Danny said, grabbing a flashlight. "Don't be an idiot," Jess snapped. But Danny was already standing, his flashlight cutting through the dark. "Relax, I'll be right back." We watched as he disappeared into the trees, his light bobbing between the trunks. The night swallowed him quickly, leaving us with only the crackle of the fire and the oppressive weight of silence. "Why does he always have to be such a show-off?" Jess muttered. I didn't answer. I was too busy listening, straining to hear anything over the pounding of my heart. Then, faintly, I heard it. A laugh. Not Danny's. It was high-pitched, almost childlike, and it sent a chill down my spine. "Did you hear that?" Jess whispered. I nodded, my mouth dry. The laugh came again, closer this time, followed by the sound of footsteps. Small, deliberate, circling us. "Danny?" Jess called, her voice trembling. No answer. The fire flickered, as if a sudden gust of wind had passed through, but the air was still. "Okay, this isn't funny anymore," Jess said, standing up. Before I could stop her, she grabbed a flashlight and headed toward the trees. "Jess, wait!" I shouted, scrambling to my feet. But she didn't stop. I stood by the fire, staring at the spot where she'd vanished, torn between following her and staying put. The forest felt alive, the shadows moving and shifting in ways they shouldn't. Then I heard it. A scream. Jess's scream. Without thinking, I grabbed my flashlight and ran. The beam of light shook wildly as I tore through the trees, calling her name. "Jess, where are you?" I found her flashlight first, lying on the ground, its beam illuminating a small clearing. The grass was flattened, as if someone or something had been dragged through it. Then I saw the blood. Panic set in. My breath came in short, shallow gasps as I turned in circles, trying to figure out where to go, what to do. That's when I heard it again. The laugh. It came from behind me, and when I spun around, my flashlight landed on a figure standing just beyond the edge of the clearing. It was a boy, no older than 10, wearing a tattered camp t-shirt and shorts. His skin was pale, almost translucent, and his eyes were empty black holes. He tilted his head, smiling. "Want to play?" he whispered. I stumbled backward, tripping over a root and falling hard. The flashlight slipped from my hand, and in the split second it took to grab it, the boy was gone. But the laughter wasn't. It echoed around me, bouncing off the trees, growing louder and louder until it was deafening. I clamped my hands over my ears, but it didn't help. And then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The silence was worse. I don't remember how I made it back to the campsite, but when I did, the fire was out. The van was gone. "Jess? Danny?" I called, my voice hoarse. No answer. The only thing left in the clearing was a single small handprint burned into the log where Jess had been sitting. They never found Jess or Danny. The police said they probably got lost in the woods, maybe fell into the lake, but I know better. I still hear the laughter sometimes, late at night. And every now and then, I find a handprint on my car, my window, my bedroom wall. He's still out there, waiting,